So I know by now everybody saw the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. It was really, really emotional. So I'm reading out of the conversation. It's an opinion piece by Ronald Sullivan. Kyle Rittenhouse verdict violates these five standards for claiming self-defense. So the proliferation of the stand your ground laws in recent years complicates the analysis of self-defense involving the duty to retreat. And so this is Kyle Rittenhouse on Friday as he enters the courtroom to hear the verdict. And so in a 2-week trial that reignited debate over self-defense laws across the nation, a Wisconsin jury acquitted Kyle Rittenhouse for shooting 3 people, 2 fatally, during a racial justice protest in Kenosha. So Wisconsin jury believed Rittenhouse claims that he feared for his life and acted in self-defense after he drove about 20 miles from his home in Antioch, Illinois, picking up an AR-15 semi-style automatic rifle in Kenosha. So in what he claimed was an effort to protect property during violent protests. So the lakeside city of 100,000 was the scene of a chaotic demonstration after a white police officer shot Jacob Blake, an unarmed black man of 29 years of age, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. So, in delivering its verdict, a Wisconsin jury decided that Rittenhouse's conduct was justified, even though the prosecution argued that he provoked the violent encounter and therefore should not be able to find refuge in the self-defense doctrine. As the prosecutor Thomas Binger said in a closing argument, when the defendant provokes this incident, he loses the right to self-defense. You cannot claim self-defense against the danger you create. The Wisconsin jury disagreed, and its decision may portend a similar outcome in another high-profile case in Georgia, where 3 white men are on trial for the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery after they claimed the black man was a suspect in a rash of robberies. Like Rittenhouse, the 3 men claimed they were acting in self-defense. Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty verdict. So these are related articles to this article. So the Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty verdict reactions. From Justice Wins the Day to Only in America. And another additional article would be Man who shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery admits that he was not threatened in any way. So self-defense, it goes on to read that self-defense arguments are often raised during trials involving loss of life. Juries are often asked to determine whether a defendant's conduct is justified by principles of self-defense or whether the offender is criminally liable for homicide. So complicating matters that each state has its own distinct homicide and self-defense laws. Some states observe the controversial stand your ground doctrine as in Georgia or not as in Wisconsin, further clouding the public's understanding on what constitutes an appropriate use of deadly force. So there's 5 elements of self-defense. As a professor of criminal law, I teach my students that the law of self-defense in America proceeds from an important concept. So human life is sacred, and the law will justify the taking of human life only in narrowly defined circumstances. The law of self-defense holds that a person who is not the aggressor is justified in using deadly force against adversaries when he reasonably believes that he is in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. This is the standard that every state uses to define self-defense. So to determine whether this standard is met, the law looks at 5 central concepts. The first one is that the use of force must be proportionate to the force employed by the aggressor. So if the aggressor lightly punches the victim in the arm, for example, the victim cannot use deadly force in response to that. So it's not proportional. Second, the use of self-defense is limited to imminent harm. So the threat by the aggressor must be immediate. So, for instance, if a person who is assaulted cannot leave the scene, then plan revenge later and conduct vigilante justice by killing the initial aggressor. Third, the person's assessment of whether he is in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury must be reasonable, meaning that a supposed reasonable person would consider the threat to be sufficiently dangerous to put him in fear of death or serious bodily injury. A person's own subjective view of his fear is not enough to satisfy the standard for self-defense. Fourth, the law does not permit a first aggressor to benefit from a self-defense justification. Okay, so only those that have clean hands can benefit from the justification and avoid criminal liability. Finally, a person that has a duty to retreat for his using deadly force, as long as it can be done safely. This reaffirms the law belief in the sanctity of human life and ensures that deadly force is an option of last resort. So stand your ground. The proliferation of the states that have adopted the stand your ground law in recent years has complicated the analysis of self-defense involving the duty to retreat. So dating back as early as Anglo-American law, the duty to retreat has been subject to an important exception historically called the castle doctrine. So a person has no duty to retreat in his home. So this principle emerged out of the 17th century maxim that a man's home is his castle. So a castle doctrine permits the use of lethal force in self-defense without imposing a duty to retreat in the home. So that means you can use force if you feel the need is imminent and you're in your home and you're protecting your home. It's the castle doctrine. Over time, states began to expand the non-retreat rule to spaces outside of the home. So stand your ground laws came under national scrutiny during the trial of George Zimmerman, who was acquitted in 2012 shooting death of Trayvon Martin. So in that case, Martin, who was 17 years of age, was walking home after buying a bag of Skittles from a nearby convenience store. So at the time, Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch volunteer who called the police after shooting Martin, after he spotted Martin, of course. Despite being told from the 911 officers to remain in his car, Zimmerman, he instead confronted Martin, and it remains unclear whether a fight had ensued or who was the aggressor, or whether Zimmerman had injuries consistent to that of the claims of being beaten up by Martin. Zimmerman was the sole survivor, and Martin, who was unarmed, died from the gunshot wound. So in the Zimmerman case, for example, under traditional self-defense law, the combination of the first aggressor limitation and duty to retreat would not have allowed Zimmerman to follow Martin around and kill him without being liable for murder. But in a stand your ground state such as Florida, Zimmerman had a lawful right to patrol the neighborhood near Martin's home. So as a result, during this trial, all Zimmerman had to prove was that he was in reasonable fear of death or serious bodily injury. That's how he was able to get away with what he did. So in Wisconsin, Rittenhouse was able to put in evidence that he was in reasonable fear of death. Similar. So in this case, I didn't do anything wrong. This was basically what he said. Rittenhouse testified. So I defended myself. And that was what he said. So the prosecution was unable to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Rittenhouse was not reasonably in fear of his safety. For his safety. So this represents a high bar for prosecution, and they were unable to surmount it. So this article I found interesting because it pretty much puts in perspective the things that people will use to get themselves exonerated or out of a situation. And maybe we should look more closely at how, like, what it says, that different states have different ways of conducting the law or the legal system. But what I do know clearly is that there are two Americas in the justice system involving that. When it comes to the justice system, it feels like it's not only a feeling, it's what we've been seeing. And what we've noticed is, here you have this guy here. He drives 20 miles, about 20 miles from his home of Antioch, Illinois. He picks up an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle in Kenosha, and he claimed that this was an effort to protect property during a violent protest. Now, place a black man in that situation. I just don't see the same verdict for him. And this is the two Americas in the justice system that I'm talking about. I've known that when I sat there looking at the trial and I was observant of and listening to what the prosecutors, the defense attorneys were claiming, it did not seem like I could wrap my head around, okay, let's picture Kyle being a black guy and the defense attorneys using the same argument for him in his case. I just don't see him getting acquitted on all charges. I just don't see it. It just doesn't, I just can't see it. And it's because the way the system is set up, and it has not really been in a place where it's designed to be in the favor of people of color. It just doesn't show up that way all the time. And a lot of times somebody's losing in every case somebody's losing, but in a lot of times when it's a case where the person of color is on trial for some incidents, and if they do come out at all, somewhere along the line they've lost some time because they were incarcerated for a long number of years, or someone was killed and they're trying to fight for um, justice to be served. And that's what recently that what we've been seeing. And sometimes it doesn't always turn out the way that people think it should. And with these cases like this, it just feels like, too, there's other factors that are at play here. You know, the different states. You know, they even in elections they'll say, well, what is the state more leaning towards? Is it a red state or a blue state, Republican state or a Democratic state? And so sometimes that plays a part in it of how they conduct their laws as well. And in all of it, in the scheme of things, it just seems like the players that are in all of this seem to lean towards a highly favored group. And no matter how the world has changed or evolved, and no matter how many people claim that they're awoke and they see all of this new revelation of justice that should be prevailed, we still see the same racism, we still see the same injustices happening, even more so now than ever before. It's also like a repeat of the past. If you look back in the past and past court trials and cases, you'll see the same thing reinventing itself all over again. And it seems like now that people have gotten a little more clever, they've studied, or they know what to say and when to say it, they have perfected how to get out of even their wrongdoings. And so I would think that this is a good article to really think about, you know, how they came to this conclusion, and also who they come to the conclusion on allowing to get um, exonerated or either let go for incidences that you see as murder clearly, and somebody that is meddling into some issue that has nothing to do with them. And here you got somebody who they can come 20 miles away and brandish a weapon and nothing be done to them, and they can come out unscathed. It just behooves me. I just don't see it. happening the same way for other people. That same way. I just cannot see it. I can't even wrap my head around this. But I feel like the justice system has a lot of bias in it, and this, I'm sure, is not going to sit well with the general population of people that live amongst this, what happened, or live in the area. And then even outside, this message that it has sent, it reverberates around nationally. People are looking at it. I mean, this is a highly high profile trial. And a lot of times they say that they don't want to show these trials because there's a lot of influence or outside influences. But people are aware of what's going on. There's more and more people that are being made aware of what's going on. And people are going to see these trials, even if they have to go on, paid TV to look at them. They're going to find a way to see them. It's going to be on the internet. It's going to show up on cell phone. It's going to show up, and it's by word of mouth. It'll show up. So there's no way in hiding and censoring this information that you could just like keep people or the public away from the truth of how this thing operates. And so what we've seen here is, to me, and then I'm going to say this is an opinion, that it's an injustice. Those two people that were killed and the people that were wounded or injured by the gunshots, they will never get their arm back. They'll never get their lives back. I don't care what the defense attorney was saying in terms of Kyle being attacked, because the reason why I'm saying this is because I feel like it went the other way, that the reason why those people attacked him is because they saw him with a gun and they didn't know what he was going to do. And so they feared for their lives. I feel it was the other way around. And so here he is, somebody that comes from out of nowhere brandishing this rifle, and he gets in the crowd and he starts yelling and shouting, and people are like, immediately their emotions are high over what had happened in their city or their town. And here you got this guy coming from 20 miles away, and he shows up with a weapon, claiming he's going to try to protect, or he's going to try to intervene. And then his true intentions are not really known. Some people are unsure of, okay, who is this guy with this long gun? And then all of a sudden he shoots people, because they're afraid of him. So they react, and in their reaction to try to get the gun away from him, he goes and he shoots people, to get them away off of him, because he can't fight them. So he takes the gun and shoots them instead. So he uses that coward way out. And so that's what I saw. And I know they paint a whole nother picture, and they play the video and all of that, and you have some footage, but I saw something totally different. And so I know that this thing has already happened, and it's a done deal, but it isn't really completely a done deal, because right now there's a lot of mixed emotion. There's opposing sides. There is more protests because of the verdict. And you're going to also send a message that other people can use this same claim that they were in fear of their life. People are going to copycat what they saw Rittenhouse do. And they're going to think, oh, I can drive 20 miles, 30 miles from my home and shoot a couple of protesters that are in defense of black people. Or I could shoot some black folks. And so that's what I saw. That's what I'm hearing. That's what this message sends when you do this.